I always thought the silence in our marriage was a sign of peace. I was wrong. It was the sound of a countdown. My husband, David, was the man every woman in our Connecticut suburb wanted. He was a high-powered attorney, a doting father, and the man who still bought me lilies every Tuesday just because. But last Tuesday, the lilies didn't arrive. Instead, I found a burner phone hidden inside a hollowed-out book on his shelf. And on that phone was a single message. The Sidewalk. 11:30 p.m. Don't be late again or I tell her everything. I followed him that night. I stood in the shadows of a crumbling industrial district while the rain soaked through my coat. I watched my perfect husband hand a thick envelope to a woman in a red hoodie. He looked terrified. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff. The Sidewalk was the only witness to his lies that night. But what I discovered in the days that followed didn't just break my heart. It turned my entire life into a crime scene. If you think you know the person sleeping next to you, think again. The smell of expensive espresso and French lavender laundry detergent. That is what my life smelled like. If you walked into our home on a crisp autumn morning in our quiet Connecticut suburb, you would see a masterpiece of American domesticity. You'd see the sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, reflecting off the polished marble of the kitchen island. You'd see my husband, David, wearing a charcoal cashmere sweater, flipping blueberry pancakes for our 2 daughters while the golden retriever waited patiently for a stray crumb. It was a life curated for Instagram, a life people envied from across the fence. But the thing about masterpieces is that they are often painted over a very dark, very messy canvas. My name is Sarah. I'm a pediatric nurse, a woman trained to spot the smallest symptoms of distress in children who can't yet speak. But when it came to the man I had slept next to for 8 years, I was functionally blind. David was a partner at a prestigious law firm in the city, a man of ironclad integrity, or so I believed. He was the guy who coached the girls' soccer team on Saturdays and spent Sundays reading history books by the fireplace. We were the golden couple. We were the benchmark for what a successful, stable marriage looked like. But about 6 months ago, the golden cage began to feel less like a sanctuary and more like a trap. The change was subtle, like a slow-growing mold behind a beautiful wallpaper. It started with the silence. Not the comfortable silence of 2 people who know each other's souls, but a heavy, pressurized silence that made my ears ring. David began to retreat into himself. He would sit on the back porch for hours after the girls went asleep, staring into the dark woods behind our house. The only movement would be the rhythmic glow of his cigarette, a habit he had quit a decade ago, but one that had returned like a ghost from his past. "It's just a big case, Sarah," he'd whisper when I'd find him there at 1:00 a.m. "The firm is pushing for a merger that's complicated. I just need to get through this quarter." I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him, because the alternative, that my husband was slipping away from me, was too terrifying to contemplate. I doubled down on my perfect wife routine. I baked his favorite bread, I bought the wine he liked, and I made sure the house was a fortress of peace. But the more I tried to hold on to him, the more he felt like sand slipping through my fingers. Then came the night walks. Every Tuesday, like clockwork, David would wait until the house was deathly still. He'd lace up his sneakers, grab his heavy overcoat, and tell me he was going to walk the neighborhood to clear his head. But when he returned 2 hours later, he didn't look refreshed. He looked hunted. His skin would be clammy, and he would crawl into bed smelling of wet asphalt and old, stale coffee, scents that didn't belong in our pristine neighborhood. The first real crack in the cage happened on a rainy Tuesday afternoon while I was doing a deep clean of the guest room. I was dusting the bookshelf, a collection of law journals and old classics, when I noticed a book that didn't belong. It was a thick, leather-bound volume titled The History of English Common Law. David kept all his professional books in his home office, never in the guest room. I pulled it off the shelf, and my heart gave a strange, sickening lurch. The book was too light. It felt hollow. When I opened the cover, my breath hitched in my throat. The center of the pages had been meticulously cut away with a razor, creating a hidden compartment. And sitting inside that hollow space was a cheap, black burner phone. I stared at it for a long time. My pulse was a drumbeat in my ears. In our world, burner phones were for criminals or people having sordid affairs. Neither of those descriptions fit David. I reached out, my fingers trembling, and pressed the power button. The screen flickered to life, casting a cold blue glow against the ivory walls of the room. There were no photos, no apps, and only one contact saved in the address book. Not a name, just 2 letters, SS. I opened the message log. There was only one thread, and the last message had been sent 3 hours earlier. SS, the sidewalk, 11:30 p.m. The rain won't hide you forever, David. Bring the full payment tonight or I go to the police. No more excuses. I felt like someone had punched me in the solar plexus. Police! Payment! The sidewalk! The words felt like lead. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. Was he being blackmailed for a legal mistake? Was he caught up in some corporate scandal? But the tone of the message felt personal. It felt visceral. I looked out the window. The gray Connecticut sky was already darkening into a bruised purple, and the rain was starting to fall, a cold, biting drizzle. In 6 hours, my husband would be walking out of our golden cage to meet SS on a sidewalk somewhere. I realized then that my life was a lie. Every morning coffee, every soccer game, every I love you whispered before sleep, it was all a facade built over a foundation of secrets. I felt a sudden, sharp pang of anger. I had spent 8 years building this life with him. I had given him my youth, my trust, and my children. I wasn't going to let a sidewalk be the only witness to whatever he was hiding. I didn't confront him when he walked through the door at 6:00 p.m. I watched him kiss our daughters on their heads. I watched him sit at the dinner table and talk about a boring deposition. I watched him play the part of the perfect husband with such precision that it made me want to scream. As the clock ticked toward 11:00 p.m., I felt a cold resolve settle over me. If David wanted to walk in the dark, I would be his shadow. I would see what the sidewalk saw. I would find out who SS was and what they had on my husband. Because in that moment, I realized the golden cage was already broken. The door was wide open, and the only way to save my children, and maybe myself, was to step out into the rain and follow him into the truth. The sidewalk was waiting, and so was I. The rain in Connecticut during late autumn isn't like a summer storm. It's a cold, biting mist that seeps into your bones and stays there. As I sat in my darkened SUV, parked 2 blocks away from our house, I watched the garage door groan open. David's black sedan pulled out slowly, its headlights cutting through the fog like the eyes of a predator. My heart was beating so loudly against my ribs, I was certain he could hear it from across the street. I waited until his taillights were small red dots in the distance before I shifted into gear. I didn't turn on my headlights. I drove like a ghost, following the man I thought I knew into a part of the state I had never visited. We left the manicured lawns and the white picket fences behind. The scenery shifted from suburban bliss to industrial decay. We were headed toward the old docks near Bridgeport, a place of rusted shipping containers, flickering yellow streetlights, and the smell of salt and rot. This was the sidewalk mentioned in the text. David pulled over near a boarded-up bakery. I parked half a block away, behind a pile of discarded pallets, and killed the engine. I was trembling, not from the cold, but from the sheer adrenaline of betrayal. I watched him through the blurred windshield. He didn't get out of the car immediately. He sat there for 5 minutes. I could see the silhouette of his head resting against the steering wheel. He looked like a man praying for a miracle or waiting for an execution. Finally, he stepped out. He was wearing his expensive charcoal overcoat, the one I'd bought him for his birthday. He looked so out of place in this wasteland, a prince in a graveyard. He walked to the edge of the sidewalk and stood under a street lamp that buzzed with a dying electricity. Then she appeared. She didn't come from a car. She seemed to materialize from the shadows of an alleyway. She was wearing a red hoodie, the fabric soaked dark by the rain. She was young, maybe early 20s, and she walked with a limp that made my stomach turn for reasons I couldn't explain. I cracked my window just an inch. The sound of the wind swallowed most of their words, but the body language was screaming. David reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick, yellow manila envelope. He held it out, but he didn't hand it over immediately. He was saying something, his face contorted in a plea. The woman in the red hoodie didn't move. She didn't reach for the money. She stood there, her face hidden in the shadow of her hood, and then she did something that shattered my soul. She reached out and touched David's cheek. It wasn't a romantic gesture. It was a taunt. A slow, mocking caress that made David flinch as if she had burned him. "Is she worth it?" I heard her voice, a high, piercing thread that cut through the wind. "Does she know what you did to keep that house, David? Does she know who paid for her diamonds?" David dropped his head. He looked like a broken man. He shoved the envelope into her hands. "Just take it, Maya, please. Stay away from my house. Stay away from Sarah." Maya, the name echoed in my head like a gunshot. Who was Maya? The woman took the envelope, but she didn't leave. She stepped closer, forcing David to back up until his heels hit the curb. She leaned in and whispered something into his ear. Whatever it was made David collapse against the side of his car. He looked like he was going to vomit. Without another word, the woman turned. Before she disappeared back into the alley, she stopped. She looked directly toward my car. For one terrifying second, I thought she saw me. The light from the street lamp caught her eyes. They were a piercing, familiar blue. A blue I saw every morning when I looked at my own husband. She spat on the sidewalk, right where David was standing, and vanished. David stood there for a long time. The rain was coming down harder now, washing away the spit, washing away the footprints, but it couldn't wash away what I had just witnessed. My husband, the pillar of the community, was paying off a girl who looked like she came from the nightmares he never told me about. He finally got back into his car and turned the U-turn that would take him back to our world. I stayed in the shadows, frozen. I looked at the sidewalk where they had stood. It looked so ordinary, just concrete and cracks. But it was the only witness to a transaction that had just ended my marriage. I didn't follow him home. I couldn't. Not yet. I waited until his car was long gone, and then I did something impulsive. I got out of my SUV. I walked to that very spot on the sidewalk. I looked down at the pavement, half expecting to find a clue, a scrap of paper, anything. There was nothing but the cold rain. But as I turned to leave, I saw something caught in the rusted metal of a nearby drain. It was a small, laminated photo. I picked it up. It was a picture of a young woman, barely 20, standing in front of a law school library. She was laughing, her hair blowing in the wind. She looked exactly like the girl in the red hoodie. On the back of the photo, written in faded ink, were the words, "Sophia, never forget why we started. D." My breath caught. Sophia, Maya's mother, and D, David. The pieces were beginning to form a picture, but it wasn't a picture of an affair. It was a picture of a haunting. I realized then that I wasn't fighting a living woman for my husband's heart. I was fighting a ghost. And the sidewalk wasn't just a meeting place. It was a crime scene from a past David had tried to bury under $1 million mortgage and lavender-scented lies. I got back into my car, the damp photo clutched in my hand. I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to go home and cry. I wasn't going to play the victim. I was going to find out who Sophia was, what happened to her 10 years ago, and why my husband was paying for her silence from the shadows of a sidewalk. The golden cage was gone. I was out in the wild now, and I wasn't coming back until I burned the whole thing down. The drive home was a blur of static and wipers. I didn't pull into the garage. I parked on the street, watching the warm, yellow glow of our living room window. David was in there. He was probably drinking a glass of water, maybe checking the locks, playing the role of the protective patriarch. I looked at the laminated photo of Sophia in my lap. Her smile felt like a physical weight. I didn't go inside for an hour. I waited until the lights went out. When I finally entered the house, the smell of lavender detergent felt like an insult. I felt like a spy in my own life. The next morning, the investigation began. It wasn't just a curiosity anymore. It was a survival instinct. I waited for David to leave for the firm. I watched his car disappear around the corner, and then I went straight to his home office. David's office was a sanctuary of mahogany and leather. It smelled of old paper and success. I had always stayed out of here. It was his private space. Now I felt like I was breaking into a tomb. I started with his desk. I went through every drawer, every file. Tax returns, property deeds, college funds. Everything was perfectly organized. Too perfect. Then I remembered the burner phone. I went to the guest room, heart racing, and pulled the hollowed-out book from the shelf. It was gone. Cold dread washed over me. He knew someone had touched it, or he had taken it with him to the meeting. I sat on the guest bed, breathing hard. I realized I couldn't find the truth in this house. I had to find it in his past. I called my brother, Leo. Leo is a private investigator in New York, the kind of guy who knows how to find things that people have spent a lot of money to hide. I didn't tell him everything. I couldn't bring myself to say the words out loud, but I gave him the name, Sophia Sterling. And I gave him the name of David's law firm, Vane and Associates. Sarah, what's going on? Leo's voice was sharp. Why are you asking about a 10-year-old cold case? Just look into it, Leo. Please, tell me how David is connected to her. I spent the rest of the day at the local library, using a public computer because I didn't want to search history on our home Wi-Fi. I typed Sophia Sterling into the archives of the Hartford Courant. The headlines hit me like a physical blow. Top law intern missing, last seen at Vane and Associates. Police call off search for Sophia Sterling, no foul play suspected. Star witness David Miller claims intern walked out late night. I scrolled through the articles, my eyes burning. 10 years ago, Sophia Sterling was the rising star of the firm where David was just a junior associate. She was brilliant, outspoken, and according to one gossip column, investigating financial irregularities within the firm's senior partners. And then she vanished. The star witness was my husband. His testimony was the only thing that kept the police from raiding the firm. He swore under oath that he saw her get into a dark SUV with an unknown driver. He gave the firm an alibi. He gave the senior partner, Arthur Vane, an alibi. 3 months after she disappeared, David was promoted to junior partner. A year later, we bought our first house. Every brick of my golden cage had been paid for with the silence of a dead girl. I sat in the dim light of the library, the blue light of the monitor reflecting in my eyes. I realized the girl on the sidewalk, Maya, wasn't David's mistress. She was Sophia's daughter, and David wasn't paying her for sex, he was paying her blood money. But why now? Why after 10 years? I went to the firm. I didn't call. I just showed up. Vane and Associates was a glass and steel monolith in the heart of the city. I walked past the receptionist, my nurse's uniform still on, looking like I belonged there. I found David's office on the 42nd floor. He wasn't in, but his assistant, a nervous woman named Claire who had worked there for 20 years, looked at me with wide eyes. Sarah, David is in a meeting with Mr. Vane. Can I get you some water? No, Claire, I left my heart medication in David's desk last week. Can I just grab it? It was a lie, but it worked. She let me in. I had 3 minutes. I didn't look for files this time. I looked for the D in the photo. I looked at David's computer. He had left his email open. I searched the name Maya. One email popped up. It was from a private address, sent 2 days ago. Subject, the sidewalk. David, my mother's body wasn't found in a dark SUV. It was found in the foundation of the new stadium project. I have the forensic report. Arthur Vane killed her and you buried her. I don't want your money anymore. I want him to burn, and if you don't help me, you're going into the fire with him. I heard footsteps in the hall, heavy, rhythmic footsteps, David and Arthur Vane. I scrambled away from the desk and stood by the window, looking out at the city. My heart was thumping so hard I thought it would burst through my scrubs. The door opened. David walked in, looking tired. Behind him was Arthur Vane, a man in his 60s with silver hair and eyes like ice. Sarah, David stopped dead. What are you doing here? I turned around, trying to keep my face a mask of suburban boredom. I just wanted to see if you were coming home for dinner, honey. You've been so stressed lately. Arthur Vane stepped forward, smiling a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Ah, the lovely Sarah. David is lucky to have such a devoted wife. We were just discussing his future. Big things coming, Sarah. Big things. He placed a hand on David's shoulder. It didn't look like a friendly gesture. It looked like a leash. In that moment, I saw the truth. David wasn't the villain of this story, not the main one anyway. He was a prisoner. He had made a deal with the devil 10 years ago to save his career, and now the devil was calling in the debt. I looked at David. He looked at me. For a split second, the mask slipped. I saw the terror in his eyes. He knew I knew. And he knew that by coming here, I had just put a target on my own back. I walked out of that office without another word. I didn't go home. I went to the one place where I knew I could think. I went back to the sidewalk. The house was too quiet when I got home. The girls were at my mother for a sleepover, a move I'd made instinctively, a mother's sixth sense for an approaching storm. I sat in the dark living room, the only light coming from the moon filtering through the high Connecticut oaks. I didn't turn on the lamps. I didn't want to see the golden cage. I wanted to see the truth. At 7:00 p.m., David's car pulled into the driveway. He didn't come in right away. I watched him through the sheer curtains. He sat in his car for a long time, the glow of his dashboard lighting up a face that had aged 10 years in a single week. When he finally walked through the door, he didn't call out my name. He knew. I was sitting in the wingback chair facing the door. On the coffee table between us lay the laminated photo of Sophia and the printed email about the stadium foundation. David stopped in the entryway. He didn't take off his coat. He just stared at the table. "How long, David?" My voice was a ghost of itself. "How long have you been living with a dead girl in your conscience?" He didn't move. He didn't deny it. He just closed his eyes and leaned his head against the doorframe. "Since the night I met you, Sarah, every beautiful moment we've had, every birthday, every holiday, she was there, standing in the corner of the room, reminding me what I traded for this." He walked over and slumped onto the sofa, looking like a man whose bones had turned to lead. Arthur Vane didn't just run her off the road. It was an argument that went wrong. She had proof he was stealing from the clients. He pushed her. She hit her head on the marble desk in his office. It was an accident. That's what he told me. "And you believed him," I spat the words. "Or did you just see a shortcut to the corner office?" David looked at me, and for the first time I saw the raw, ugly truth. I was 25, Sarah. I had nothing. My family was bankrupt. I saw a man who could give me everything or destroy me in a second. He told me if I helped him move her, if I gave him the alibi, he would make me a partner by 30. I thought I could live with it. I thought I could bury it. "But Maya didn't stay buried," I said, pointing to the photo. "Maya is Sophia's daughter," David whispered. "She was 3 years old when her mother vanished. I've been paying for her school, her rent, her entire life. I thought it was penance, but you can't pay off a soul, Sarah. She found out the truth last month. She doesn't want the money anymore. She wants Arthur's head on a platter, and she wants mine too." Suddenly, the front door rattled. A heavy, authoritative knock echoed through the foyer. My heart leaped into my throat. "Don't answer it," David hissed, standing up. But I was already at the door. I looked through the peephole. It wasn't the police. It was Arthur Vane. He wasn't alone. 2 men in dark suits stood behind him, the kind of men who don't have names, only jobs. "David," Arthur's voice was muffled but clear through the heavy oak. "I know Sarah was at the office today. We need to have a family meeting. Open the door, son. Let's not make this difficult." David grabbed my arm, his grip frantic. "Sarah, listen to me. There's a safe in the basement behind the wine rack. The code is Sophia's birthday. Everything is in there. The recordings, the original files Arthur thought I burned. Everything. If anything happens to me tonight, you take that to the FBI, not the local police. Arthur owns them. Go, now." "I'm not leaving you," I yelled. "You have to, for the girls." The door didn't just open. It was kicked in. The frame splintered with a deafening crack. Arthur Vane stepped into our pristine living room, shaking his umbrella as if he were just arriving for a dinner party. "The problem with perfect lives, David," Arthur said, looking around at our expensive furniture, "is that they are very easy to break." He looked at me, his eyes as cold as the Atlantic. "Sarah, you've been a very curious nurse, but curiosity in this town is a terminal illness." One of the men in suits stepped toward me, but David threw himself in the way. It was the only brave thing I had ever seen him do. "Leave her out of this, Arthur. I have the files. They're set to go to the press if anything happens to us." David lied. I knew he was lying because the files were still in the basement. Arthur laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "David, you were always a better actor than a lawyer. I searched your office an hour ago. I know you don't have them on you." He signaled to the men, "Find the files and clean up the mess." As the man lunged for David, I didn't think. I grabbed the heavy glass decanter from the side table and swung it with everything I had. It shattered against the man's temple. He went down, but the second man was already on me. In the chaos, the sounds of our golden cage being destroyed filled the air, shattering glass, heavy boots on hardwood, David's grunts of pain. I was pushed toward the kitchen, my head hitting the marble island. My vision blurred. I saw Arthur Vane standing over David, who was crumpled on the floor. "The sidewalk was the only witness for 10 years, David," Arthur sneered. "It's a shame you couldn't keep your wife away from it." But Arthur had made one mistake. He thought I was just a devoted wife. He forgot I was a nurse who dealt with trauma every single day. Through the haze of pain, my hand found the heavy knife block on the counter. I didn't reach for a steak knife. I reached for the burner phone I had hidden in my pocket, the one I had set to record the moment Arthur knocked on the door. "It's over, Arthur," I croaked, holding up the phone. "I'm not recording for the press, I'm live streaming. There are 4,000 people watching this right now. My brother, the private investigator." He shared the link. It was a bluff. I didn't have 4,000 viewers. I had 0. But in the age of the internet, a man like Arthur Vane couldn't take that risk. He froze. His eyes darted to the phone, then to the door. In that moment of hesitation, the sound of sirens, real sirens, erupted from the street. My brother Leo hadn't just watched a link, he had called the state police. The golden cage was flooded with blue and red lights. The sirens eventually faded, replaced by the clinical, cold reality of a crime scene. Our golden cage was wrapped in yellow police tape. The neighbors, the same ones who used to wave at us during our Saturday morning jogs, stood on their lawns, their faces illuminated by the flashing lights, whispering into their phones. The perfect illusion hadn't just cracked, it had disintegrated. Arthur Vane was led away in handcuffs, his expensive suit wrinkled, his silver hair disheveled. He didn't look like a king anymore. He looked like an old man whose secrets had finally caught up with him. David was taken out on a stretcher. He was alive, but the look he gave me as they loaded him into the ambulance was one of profound grief. It was the look of a man who knew he was finally free, but the cost of that freedom was his entire world. The months that followed were a blur of courtrooms, depositions, and the slow, painful dismantling of my life. I had to sell the house to pay for the legal fees and the restitution to the families Arthur had defrauded. Moving out was the hardest part. Packing up the girls' rooms, seeing the outlines on the walls where their growth charts used to be, it felt like I was mourning a person who was still alive. But there was one final thing I had to do. 3 months after the night of the explosion, I returned to the industrial district. I didn't go in the middle of the night this time. It was a gray, overcast Sunday afternoon. I stood on that same sidewalk, the concrete now dry and cracked under the pale sun. Maya was already there. She wasn't wearing the red hoodie. She was dressed in a simple black coat, her hair pulled back. Without the shadows of the alleyway, she looked startlingly like David. She had his jawline, his stoic posture. She was a living reminder of the sister David had tried to bury. "He's being sentenced tomorrow," I said, my voice steady. 5 years for perjury and accessory. It would have been more, but the prosecution acknowledged he was under duress from Vane. Maya didn't look at me. She stared at the spot where her mother's photo had once lain. "Do you hate him?" she asked quietly. I took a deep breath, the cold air stinging my lungs. "I hate the lies. I hate that he built our life on a grave, but I see the man he was trying to be. He wanted to be the hero for us because he couldn't be the hero for Sophia." Maya finally turned to look at me. Her blue eyes were wet. "He gave me the files, Sarah. Before the police arrived, he had already sent a digital copy to my lawyer. He knew he was going to prison. He did it to make sure Arthur didn't win. She reached into her pocket and handed me a small envelope. I opened it. Inside was a key to a safe deposit box, and a letter addressed to our daughters. "He set up a trust for your girls," Maya whispered. "It's not the blood money from Vane. It's the money he earned honestly from his first 3 years as a public defender. He wanted them to have something that wasn't tainted." I clutched the key, feeling a sob rise in my throat. We stood there in silence for a long time, 2 women bound together by the wreckage of one man's choices. The sidewalk beneath our feet had seen the worst of him, the fear, the payments, the cowardice. But now it was witnessing something else. It was witnessing the beginning of the truth. "What will you do now?" I asked. "I'm going to find her," Maya said. "The police are excavating the stadium site. I'm going to give my mother a real grave. No more sidewalks, no more alleys." She walked away then, her limp less pronounced than I remembered. I watched her until she disappeared into the city traffic. I stayed on the sidewalk for a few more minutes. I looked at my reflection in a nearby puddle. I was a different woman than the one who had followed her husband here months ago. I was poorer, lonelier, and haunted. But as I walked back to my modest, second-hand car, I felt a lightness I hadn't felt in years. I went home, not to the mansion in Connecticut, but to a small 2-bedroom apartment where my daughters were waiting. We had no marble islands, no Tesla, and no golden cage. But when I tucked them in that night and kissed their foreheads, I didn't have to look over my shoulder. The sidewalk was the only witness to his lies, but the truth was mine to keep. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. If you're listening to this and you feel like something in your life isn't right, if the silence in your home feels too heavy, don't ignore it. The truth can be a fire that burns your world down, but it's the only thing that can clear the ground for something real to grow. Thank you for listening to my story. Stay safe out there.